Hello, everyone, and welcome once again to the Soldiers of Cinema podcast. As always, your co-host, actually, because there is two of us. Your co-host, Clark Coffee, that's me. And as always, Cullen McFader. What's up,
Hello.
dude?
Well, there's actually three of us. We've got a little sidekick that sits here and doesn't say anything every week, but we're trying to get him out of his shell, so.
Well,
That's Nosferatu over there.
I didn't want to say anything. I didn't want to mention that we actually have a third co-host because I do know how shy this third co-host is. So maybe at some point they will come out of their shell and they'll be willing to discuss a film. But for now, it's just the two of us. Anyway, Cullen, I was not expecting that. But I'm so excited for episode 70. I can't believe this is our 70th episode, where we are going to be discussing Cullen's pick, The Old Man and the Gun.
Yeah.
David Lowery's film from 2018, starring Robert Redford, who I know is maybe he's not necessarily one of your favorites, but I know
a big fan, yeah.
Butch Cassidy, Sundance Kid. I know that you love him from that film, which is one that we discussed quite a bit earlier. That was your pick. Also starring Casey Affleck, Danny Glover, Tika Sumpter, Tom Waits. I was surprised to see actually with like the platinum white or dyed hair. Or, well, actually, it's probably just he's old. Actually, it's probably just his real hair color. I'm saying dyed.
A long way from Martha. So
yeah. And the absolutely fantastic and just really wonderful to watch Sissy Spacek star in the film.
Hey, excuse me. Need some help?
No, I'm good.
Let me take a look.
You know anything about cars?
No, not really.
So, what did you say you do?
Well, that's a secret.
And why is that?
Well, because if I told you, you probably wouldn't want to see me again.
Who said I was going to see you again?
Would you? Well, let's take this place. Say it was a bank, and instead of that counter up there, that was really a teller's window, and you just walk in, real calm. So you walk right up, look her in the eye, and you say, "Ma'am, this is a robbery." And you show her the gun like this. And you say, "I wouldn't want you to get hurt, because I like you. I like you a lot. So don't go breaking my heart now, okay?"
You're not serious.
Excuse me, I'd like to open up an account.
Well, great. What type of account do you have in mind?
This kind. This kind.
You said he was armed.
He had a gun.
You saw him.
Well, he was also sort of a gentleman.
He was very polite.
He seemed like a nice enough fella.
Look at that. Is he smiling?
5 states.
93 robberies. In 2 years.
You think you can catch him?
Yeah, I won't lie. I'd love to slap the cuffs on him myself. But I hope I get the chance.
Try another city, baby, another town.
He spent his whole life locked up, except for the times that he broke out.
Somebody should have told him to quit while he was ahead.
Well, you find something you love.
Come following down.
I know exactly where I'm supposed to be.
You're never exactly where you're supposed to be, are you? Now, whenever I close the door, I think, is this the last time I'll ever have a chance to do whatever that thing was?
You know what I do when the door closes? I jump out the window.
Living is a gamble, baby. Loving's much the same. Wherever.
I sat down with him once and I said, surely there's an easier way to make a living. And he looked at me and he said, I'm not talking about making a living. I'm just talking about living.
Your pick, so you lead off. I'm really curious to hear about how and I'm interested too because as a young kid, I still call you kid, right? You're kind of a kid. I'm almost like surprised, I shouldn't be because you've picked some films that I wouldn't imagine a younger person might be drawn to. But I was kind of surprised that you were drawn to this film. It's everybody it stars is old, which we don't see much of anymore, which I think is sad, or not anymore, maybe ever. Films tend to skew young. It's nice to see some older people on camera, as I myself am.
Some everymen,
So
And
it's
every
nice
woman.
to kind of, I mean, yeah, of course, Robert Redford, even at, he had to have been about 80 when he shot this, 81 or
Yeah.
so when it was released. I mean, of course, he still looks handsome as ever. So, even at 80, he's looking better than me, but
Yeah.
I digress. So
Looks
I'm
better
kind of
than most
surprised you
people.
picked it. So I'm kind of curious to hear your story about what drew you to the film and why you picked it and everything.
Yeah, no, I've only seen, I think, one of other David Lowery's other movies. I've seen Ghost Story.
Okay. I've seen
and
none, by the way.
I
Yeah.
believe I saw that before this, if I can remember correctly. So, but this has always been a really interesting movie to me because I remember, so I saw the trailer before it came out.
Okay.
And remember thinking that it really lined up with like my sensibilities and what I liked, especially at that time. I was actually writing, like my first feature that I ever wrote that I didn't wind up making, but I wrote, is very similar in tone and style to this. I wanted to shoot it on 16 millimeter in a 235 aspect ratio and have
Which
very
this is
similar,
just-
that
yeah.
like very 70s vibe, which they
Right.
do in this movie. And we'll get into that in detail.
Yeah.
But I remember hearing that it was coming to TIFF that year, the Toronto International Film Festival, and I bought a ticket for the premiere there.
Okay.
And so I got to see it at the premiere with the cast and David
what a
Lowery.
great way.
And
Yeah, what a great way to watch it.
yeah, and it was really neat. I mean, I remember watching it and Danny Glover's on screen, and I was looking at the back of his head because he was a few rows in front of me, and it was kind of a weird, mind-boggling thing. But no, it was great. It was really like I really liked it, and I always found it interesting because the movie wasn't a flop. It was critically, did pretty well. Critics liked it, and things like that. But it also sort of flew under the radar.
Yeah, very small film.
And I think I know kind of the reasons for that, which we'll get into, and we'll try to, I think, kind of unpack those. But no, I think that it was just a really, like, I don't know, I watched this movie and it just kind of puts a smile on my face, and there's nothing too, like, the darks aren't really too dark, and it's quite fun. There's a lot of like fun montages.
Yeah, it's pretty light.
I like the filmmaking. I love Robert Redford's performance, and Sissy Spacek as always is fantastic and charming and lovely. And
okay.
yeah, like it just kind of feels to me like like it probably was a pretty fun thing to work on. Like it seems like everyone's really enjoying their time on the movie, and I like the writing. I like
it's relaxed,
and it's kind of one of those things that you don't like.
Casual.
We've talked
almost.
a few about this. I talked a bit about this before in previous episodes, but where we talk about like, A, could this movie be made today, and B, could it get a theatrical release today? And I think this is one of those things that's not because it's so dramatic or controversial or something like that, but rather because it's really rare to see a movie that is kind of comfortable with not making like a huge statement. You know, like it's not really, I don't mean this in a negative way, but it's not really saying much about, like, there's obviously commentary about things, but it's not trying to make anything bold statements. It's not trying to shock the audience or like
it's a
scare
very
people
confident film, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
it's very confident. It's very meticulously and like steadfastly paced in the sense,
quite restrained in its
it's
in its like even its runtime. It's only about an hour and a half.
It's not hyperbolic. It's not melodramatic. It's not saccharine. It's not big. Yeah, it's I think subtle, mostly. So
and
I
I've watched
too,
it.
yeah.
I've watched it. I think this was my third time watching it.
Okay.
And I always just my one complaint about the movie is always just that I wish it was longer, and I think that's probably a good thing to say about a movie.
Sure.
That
You
I
want
wish
more.
I could spend more time with these characters and the style of it, and it's just, I think there's also like the movie is quite melancholic in ways. And I find that I kind of get melancholic watching it because it's almost like a swan. Not only is it kind of Robert Redford's swan song as he retired after making this from acting, but it's also kind of like a little bit of a swan song to like a bygone era of filmmaking. Like I can't imagine a movie like this really, getting made ever again. Like it almost seems like it's just kind of like saying goodbye to this really 70s warm, pleasant feeling of film.
Well, it's interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting. I mean, so it sounds like that when you watched it, it spoke very much to like a sensibility and even an era of filmmaking that you appreciate, and I do too. the mid to late 60s and 70s American films, or it's not to say, of course, that there weren't many others, but I mean this is specifically kind of speaking to American cinema in the 60s and 70s as kind of right, and that's where Robert Redford kind of lived. And yeah, I would agree. I mean, it immediately there are some stylistic choices that bring us to that place very quickly. The stock that it was shot on, the way that it's lit and graded, the way the camera moves or doesn't move and zooms actually instead of moving. And of course, Robert Redford as an icon, not just an actor, but as an icon, brings so much baggage. And I don't mean that in a bad way, but brings so much baggage to this film that, you and I briefly talked about it before we started discussing it after we hit record. And I was kind of curious. I wonder, was this made for him? So I wasn't aware of this film before I watched it now. And I didn't know a ton of the background on it. And so I was kind of trying to fish around for well, obviously I can see that this was kind of based on, in part, a real life story. There was really this person who, a book was written about him, and, he was a bank robber, and he kind of, there's a little bit of underlying truth to this, but it feels so much that it was written so specifically for Redford. And I don't know how much it was tailored, after the fact, or how much he had influence on the way it was shot and everything, but it really feels like, wow, this could be
I believe...
just a metaphor for him and his career in film. It seems
exactly, yeah. I believe, if I can remember correctly from the Q&A at the end of the screening at TIFF, the movie was written for Robert Redford, and it was kind of one of those situations where it's like, had he said no, they wouldn't have gone ahead with it, and it was kind of almost dedicated to him in that sense, but he wasn't involved. I believe he wasn't involved in the actual development of it.
Gotcha.
But yeah, it's almost like they're kind of taking this story of this kind of bizarrely pleasant bank robber and using that as a vehicle to set Robert Redford's career as a nice bow on the kind of a bookend of it, and
yeah, I mean, before we dive in too much too, I'll just share a little bit of my kind of personal response to the film too, as we already starting to have a lot of little paths that we can dive down and break it and get into about the film. But so I actually, I don't recall, at least, ever having heard of this before. Doesn't mean that I didn't, but now at my age, my memory, I can't trust it. So I don't remember having heard about this film before. Again, I definitely like Redford. When I see him on stage, it's clear he's charismatic. And every time or most times I watch him, I end up enjoying his performances. But for some reason, and maybe I need to rectify this, I just haven't actively gone out and sought to go through his filmography for some reason, like I have so many other performers. You and I were just chatting. I was like, I've always kind of seen myself more as a Newman guy as opposed to a Redford guy, and I don't know why that is really exactly. And I think maybe after having watched this film, I'm going to go back and try to plug in those holes where I've missed a lot of his filmography and kind of see what I think. But, so I didn't come into this with any preconceived notions or expectations of what this, I didn't know what it was about. I just put it on and was immediately struck by a few things. I mean, the pacing of the film was one of the most immediate things. The visually 16 millimeter. I saw it on a 4K digital print on Apple TV or whatever, iTunes or whatever the hell that is now, and it looked beautiful. And immediately I was like, holy crap. I actually paused for a quick second and I looked up what the tech specs on the film, because it was so clearly film, but it was really, really clearly film. And so I was like, what in the world was this shot on?
Well, exactly. Like if you want to do a film look these days, you almost have to shoot 16 because 35 is so clear.
Yeah. And I was like, oh, okay. It was shot 16 because I was just like, wow, Yeah. And of course, the way it's graded and the way it's lit. And it just really was like, wow. And then I noticed immediately, because I love zooms and they are so almost taboo today. that I immediately see this beautiful zoom work that we've got going on throughout the entire film. I mean, it's just all over the place, and I frankly love it. I think it looks great here. So that really jumped out to me. The look immediately, you know, the film takes place primarily in 1981. It almost looks like though they're shooting this in a way that would have been shot in 71.
Yeah.
Honestly.
Yeah.
It looks absolutely beautiful. Performances are like across the board stellar. I mean, you know, this conversation that Redford has with SpaceX's character in the diner when they first meet, when we have the scene where he robs a bank in the beginning, and immediately we see the tone, right? It's the antithesis of most bank robber heist, you know, scenes in a movie. It's like
certainly
so
not
laid
Heat.
back. Yeah, it's not Heat, right? But this film definitely shares some of that template with Heat, you know, with a Fleck kind of being Pacino and with Redford being De Niro. We definitely have that template there, though, that the cat and the mouse kind of need each other in the chase. And they actually even speak to it like very explicitly when a Fleck's daughter or a Fleck's character's daughter actually explicitly states this, observes it and states it to him that he kind of needs the chase. But you've got like immediately we set the tone, and I think you'd said that it's lighthearted. We don't ever get a sense that like anybody's ever in danger. He's clearly not out to hurt anyone. He's this gentleman bank robber. He's like concerned about the cashier's safety, you know?
Yeah, when she starts crying and he's like, "You're doing a great job."
Yeah. And so, you know, we see this right away, but we also see he's very, very competent. We get the introduction of this ticking clock motif that runs throughout, which I think is kind of interesting. It's not just that the time is short for the bank robbery that he's engaged in at the time, but also in any kind of several times throughout the film, we speak to this, that his time short. He's obviously old. He's in the twilight of his life. And so we have this interesting kind of existential examination of this. And, you know, Drugstore Cowboy, the film that we covered last time, I think there's a lot of similar themes in these films.
Definitely, yeah. And that was totally unintentional on my part, but watching this again, I realized,
I thought it was intentional. I thought you were like, okay, I was, in my mind, I was like, I know Cullen loves Redford, and here's his answer to Drugstore Cowboy. He's, you know,
I had completely, I was totally out of left field. It was kind of strange that as I was watching it, I was like, oh,
isn't that funny?
Very similar, yeah.
But I want to talk about in a second. Sorry, I'm a little long-winded here on my kind of, you know, initial impressions, but I want to talk about that because I think this theme, dare I almost say trope, of, you know, this criminal anti-hero that lives a life of crime but is actually kind of like a good dude. You know, this is an interesting trope that I want to kind of go into a little bit later, but yeah. So these things jump out at me. And this beautiful, like I was going to lead up to, you know. So he robs the bank, and he's escaping the bank, and his cops are on his tail, sort of, kind of, and he drives by this woman who's broken down in her old beautiful Ford truck. I think it's a Ford truck. Now that I've said that, geez, I'm probably wrong. It's probably a GMC, but anywho. Pulls over and helps this woman who happens to be Sissy Spacek, and they go to a diner and they just have this really wonderful conversation, and you just don't see a lot of writing like this. It's all beautiful subtext and nuance, and it's so fun for me to, you know, to see two older characters in this meet cute. Basically, it's what it is a meet cute, and I just thought it was like really beautiful, and the performances just sustained that beauty. I think throughout the entire film, there's nuance, there's like a gravitas and kind of an introspection to it that was really appealing to me. So
yeah, well, I mean, I also want to touch on, like, they're obviously the very overt. I mean, the font on the poster is the Butch Cassidy font. It's Hobo
okay,
STD.
immediately, like the yellow,
The opening picture of the film is, or title is,
the title card.
This film, or what follows, is mostly also true. Like, it's very much referencing the fact that at the beginning of Butch Cassidy it says this, what follows is mostly true.
Mostly, yes. I love that, actually.
One thing that I actually really, really admire about Lowery's decisions in this movie is that it would be so easy to fall into a like wink wink, nudge nudge, tongue in cheek, every line is a reference to Butch Cassidy or Robert Redford's career or whatever, and there's very obvious visual cues of whatever.
They do a holograph
Newman, right?
Like they CGI Newman.
Like one of his bank robberies is him and Newman or something. But they don't. They really don't. Like, I mean, the closest you get to an overt reference to other than like the font choice is him riding a horse with a fedora on, but I mean, even then it's not a cowboy
and the
hat.
Poncho, or
but
like the pseudo
in Lowery, I do remember Lowery talking about how he was very, very specifically aware of that he didn't want to just make a movie that was just going to be like I'm pointing at the screen because I understand the reference. Like he really tried to hold back on any references like that and sort of have the tone of something like Butch Cassidy, which is also quite a lighthearted film. It's about these two bank robbers who are great friends and great guys. But at the same time,
their fate is set. Their fate is a tragedy, but the story to it, the journey to it, is lighthearted.
And so I think that I really admire, because I think that it's kind of hard to admire a movie, like it's kind of hard to put into words or have an audience really recognize when a movie doesn't do something that would have been really easy to do. Like, it's much easier to say, like, I admire this movie for the bold choice that it made here, but rather than saying, I admire this movie for a choice it didn't make. But that's really what I feel here, is that like it would have been so easy to fall into the trap of just references and like hitting the audience over the head with just these throwbacks and things like that, and it doesn't do any of that. And I think that's one of the reasons that it makes, like, it really, you don't need to know who Robert Redford is to enjoy this movie.
But it helps if you do.
Yes,
but it
definitely helps if you do.
It definitely helps if you do, and I would agree with you. I think the film doesn't beat you over the head with these allusions, but they're definitely there. You've mentioned a couple that were very explicit, and I definitely was conscious of it, right? And to the point where even I kind of was wondering, again, because I'm not a scholar of Redford's filmography, where I was even kind of wondering, like, okay, what is this potentially in a reference to right now? Or what is that, like, what movie are they watching in the theater at the end of the film? Does that have any bearing? Or, what film might have this been? If he's on the horse and it's sunset and, he's got the fedora and the poncho or the pseudo poncho, So I did definitely, and of course I noticed the fonts that you mentioned about in the title card. And so I was very aware of it. And it was obviously like you can look, it's like, again, Redford is an icon. He's not just an actor. I mean, the guy is one of the most iconic actors in cinema history, right? And here he is, and in this film, he's 80 years old. So, and the film is clearly, or could be construed as a pretty straight metaphor for, Redford doing his thing, robbing banks versus making films, doing the thing that you're good at. This again goes back drugstore cowboy, right? It's like you're doing the thing you're good at. You're doing the thing that you know. And then the universe kind of has its challenges in your way, as it is for all of us, no matter what we're doing, and kind of coming to the end of your life, coming to the end of your career, and kind of facing that, And how do we face that? How do we face our mortality? And how do we face that suffering and challenge in life? So even without, you don't have to know those things, but boy, I think it adds a lot if you do.
Yes, yeah. It would definitely, it adds a layer of context that I think makes the choices much more interesting. But yeah, I mean, I also... I think that I want to talk a little bit about like the look of the film too, which we've touched on so far. But
it's so beautiful. God, it looks great.
Like, yeah, and I think one of the things that I love about it is, and you touched on this earlier. So it's obviously very grainy. It's 16 millimeter. It's the
not distractingly so.
The lights, exactly. But it's just so, like, that really is, to me, one of those things where it's like the proof is in the pudding about film. Like you watch this and it's just gorgeous, even though it is quite grainy and it is quite, and yet it's still, there's an artistry to it and kind of like a painterly like quality to it. And even just, of course, every movie is digitally color graded these days, unless you're Paul Thomas Anderson, who does all this stuff chemically.
It was even edited in Premiere. It was, they scan it. And,
one thing that they did that's really smart, and you can watch a lot of short films and music videos and feature films that are shot on 16 millimeter, where the digital tools enable you to push the colors, and it's this hyper saturated thing but film just kind of tends to clip colors less, so you can really go much more saturated without it looking kind of garish like it would on digital, and you can make it warm and colorful and vibrant, whereas this movie kind of, again, doesn't, it holds back. It goes for a look of that chemical kind of treatment where the color is beautiful. There are some really rich, deep colors, but they're not.
It's almost washed in some.
Yeah, it's not so like pushed in a way that you see a lot of 16 millimeter film.
No,
these
not
days.
at all.
And I think that's, if I can say one thing about myself that I I like,
okay.
is
right.
that the only reason I can really recognize that is because a lot of times when I'm trying to emulate film, I go that route, which is kind of a less popular route to go because it's less overt and it's less obvious.
And just so people know, because I don't know, I can't, maybe we've not discussed it in a while, or, I can't remember when we were, but I mean, you put a lot of time and effort into creating your own custom film emulation plugins, basically, right? I mean,
yeah.
So I know you spend a lot of time studying different film looks, what makes something look filmic. And I know that obviously, like, you shoot digital, at least you have up until this point, but I know that you spend a lot of time and energy on that, and you spend a lot of time studying that. So
it's definitely, I mean, the reason I like that sort of thing and I'm interested in is because it's choices like that it's never a one size fits all thing, right? Like the look of this movie wouldn't work for Heat, to go back to an earlier comparison we made.
Right.
And yet I love to see when a director is very clearly thinking about these things, that it's not just a matter of like, we're shooting to look either cool or like really good and everything's framed immaculately and perfectly. And, there's
like
grit
Fincher?
to this movie. There's, well, exactly. And I think, I don't actually, maybe this is a stretch, but I don't think it is, because there's quite a running thread through it. But Conrad Hall, who did the cinematography for Butch Cassidy, who is my personal favorite cinematographer.
That's right.
Was very, very famous for imperfect images. He never wanted his images to be down to even
quote
symmetry.
Unquote imperfect.
Yes, yeah.
Like less formal maybe would be.
Yeah, not like that there's anything wrong with them technically.
Right.
But rather, like, if you look at a image, famous one is American Beauty, when the girl's sitting in the bath and it's the shot, there's the windows behind her. Most directors and cinematographers would frame that perfectly symmetrical, where like each side is perfect and the windows are exactly in the same place on each side of the frame and things like that. Whereas Conrad Hall,
or at least Wes Anderson would.
or even, I mean, Fincher would too, right? And I think Deakins likely would too, because you see a lot of that in Deakins' work. Whereas Conrad Hall was more interested in like, well, how does the light play on each texture in the shot? How does the camera move? How is the story being told through what we're seeing and things like that, where it's less about technical precision and perfection and much more about storytelling.
If I may, I may, and I want to say too, because we've not mentioned his name, but Joe Anderson is the DP on this film.
Yeah.
And so since we're talking about his work here, obviously in conjunction with the director, so I want to give him props, because obviously as the DP, he's clearly vital for how the film looks. But I think, I mean, what you're describing, so I don't know how far we want to get down this technical rabbit hole, but it's not so much that it's imperfect. Or that but really what it's about, I think, is like going beyond the obvious pieces of the mise en scène and creating balance just on those most obvious pieces, and going beyond that and looking at the more nuanced aspects of the mise-en-scène and the weight of the light and the weight of the shadow, and you're looking at more, subtle, is it complex? I don't know. Or maybe it's just looking at alternate ways to balance a frame or create unbalance on purpose.
Yeah, and it's almost,
but
you're
I just
focusing on
kinda,
different things in a way, right?
right. And so I think it's
Yeah.
not so much like, well, this framing's perfect and that framing's not perfect, but I think it's more about using a deeper palette of what's in the mise-en-scène and choosing to create a frame around more of those elements than just the lower lying fruit or the most obvious elements, right? So I think it's really I mean, it's a real joy when you see work that's done that way. And it's one of the things, not that we're talking about Wes Anderson, and obviously he doesn't shoot his own films, but it's very clear that he has, I mean, he dictates very clearly what his films look like, because they all look the same. I'm not a fan of the way his films look, at least not since, Royal Tenenbaums, because I just think they're just so formal. They're just so they're just so framed in a way that's just not exciting to me. It doesn't feel like
it's kind of, I don't mean to degrade anyone's work, but I refer to it almost in a way of like, it's what I call like desktop background cinematography, where is it a really like nice looking shot. It's one of those shots that you could use as your phone background or you could use as your desktop wallpaper.
Because it's not distracting.
And it's beautiful. Yeah. And it's like beautifully composed. The light's beautiful. And it's not to, again, and I'm not saying that you were doing that, but not to degrade any of the talents. There's clearly a lot of talent behind any of Wes Anderson's images, but it's not what I go for. I think that you probably agree, right?
I don't go for that either. And I just think it's not challenging in an interesting way to me. And so to bring it back to this, I mean, I'm agreeing with you. I think it's really interesting when you see, compositions that are more interesting and that are sometimes more challenging, and perhaps on like your kind of first knee-jerk reaction might be, well, this is off balance or something, but then you're drawn into it and there's a story being told there that actually is in great balance. So, all right.
Well, the one final point I'll make on that too is that one of the things that I think is really great about living in this era of filmmaking is a movie like this shows you what you can do with digital tools. So, and the one shot I'll use as an example is it's the opening scene of Casey Affleck's character. Casey Affleck plays the cop that's chasing Redford down,
right?
And it's a shot of a street. I think it's in Dallas or something. I can't remember what Texas city they shot it in. And you see Casey Affleck's cruiser going down this like empty street in the middle of the night, and of course, those halogen lights don't exist anymore. Like no city uses those green
or the mercury. I think those are
whatever they were.
Sodium, the sodium mercury lights.
That they
the
used sodium vapor or whatever.
Yeah.
So nobody uses those lights anymore. I'm sure that there's somewhere in the world that might, but anywhere in North
America,
probably
all
Europe
LED now.
Yeah, and they're even beyond those orange ones. But what they did was they took the grade in. They didn't go and replace every light on that street with those sodium lights. They just shifted that color, qualified that color in the grade, and so it's like one of those things where you can really approach period stuff like that, and period aesthetic especially, because that's something that's really evocative of the 70s, is those green street lamps.
Absolutely.
And you can take that and you can again apply those to something that would be completely out of budget for a lot of people. So I think
for the average person, and it's interesting too. And I'm curious. Have you worked on any 16 millimeter?
Well, I own a 16 millimeter camera, but I've only shot short little tests and experiments with it. I've never I've worked on a film set that I wasn't in charge of that was shooting on film, but that was 35. But I've never like shot a film on on
but it would be very interesting, especially since you have a camera. Maybe you could do some analysis. At least I would be very interested, and maybe some of the other listeners here might be interested in if you kind of created an emulation of 16 millimeter, it might be really fun. I just don't. I know. I think you've primarily worked on like 35 emulation. Right?
Yeah, I've
Different
done
films.
35, 70. I've done some 16.
Right.
A Western that I did a few years ago, I did sort of 16.
Okay.
Very
So
actually
you've got-
inspired by this film.
Okay.
But yeah, it's very. I mean, it's again not to bog anything down in the technical, but it's a very fascinating thing that has
It's
a lot
okay.
more
People can
impact on the
fast
film
forward.
than I think
They can fast forward a second if they. We'll
Yes,
bring
yeah.
We'll
I
bring
think
it
it
out
just
of
has
that
a lot more
anyway.
impact on the film than a lot of people realize usually because it's sort of a subconscious
Well,
thing.
and I
right?
think it's obviously you don't have to be nerds like us who, and there are people who are even much more technically, involved and would get even much more deeply technical than we are here.
Mm-hmm.
But you don't have to be on any of those levels though to watch the film and just be subconsciously impacted. That it's
Mm-hmm.
evocative of an era. And that's all that it is. For them, it's just part of the storytelling, and it works on a subconscious level. And boom. But yeah, I think both of us agree. I mean, it's just really a beautifully shot film. I think we touched a little bit on the performances. Were there any? For me, I think what really stood out, honestly, Sissy Spacek's performance really stands out to me. It was so fun watching her, but I feel like everybody across the board, their performances are great. Tom Waits, his little monologue there about his stepfather, I think was really wonderful. Redford carries the film on his shoulders. And
even
I
the
think
little
there's
bit parts of like the bank tellers and things like that, they're all
really cute.
great.
Yeah, I mean, like very like endearing. He's clearly very charming. He has been his whole career. I think Casey Affleck is great, very subdued. And we've seen this from him in other performances. But he's definitely subdued here, but I think appropriately. There's also some humor there. The one thing I'd have to say is that I was really kind of disappointed that I didn't see more Danny Glover. When I realized he was in the film, I was excited. I think we first see him. He's a driver for Redford's character when Redford is scoping out a bank that he's gonna take, or he's getting ready to walk in there and rob it. But we really don't see much from him, and I don't know if there was more shot, maybe that was like left on the cutting room floor, but we really see very, very little of him, and he absolutely can hold his own with all these other actors. And I guess I just really would have liked to have seen something from him.
Yeah, no, I mean he's a great. Like I love Danny Glover too, and again that's kind of my one complaint about the movie is that there's not more to it.
And I kept waiting, because I was like, okay, now we've got the three of them are in the bar, and we have Tom Waits telling his story, and I'm like, okay, great, now Glover's gonna get to come in and
Have
tell
his
us a little
moment,
bit, and we don't have it. I'm just like, no, it's like, I mean, basically the biggest moment we've got with Glover is that we get a sense that he maybe got caught and had to give Redford up. And so, spoiler alert, when, near the end of the film, when Redford comes to a meetup and Danny Glover's sitting on the porch and stands up, and as soon as he does, all the police
floodlights
swarm
come
in.
on, and
swarm in on him. So I guess we didn't actually do a spoiler alert in the beginning here, but I guess
people are probably used to us spoiling things.
People are probably used to it. I mean, we don't usually do newer films. So I feel like whenever we're, discussing a film that's 30, 40, 50 years old, 60 years old, we don't generally feel the need to give a spoiler, alert warning because it's like, well, come on.
I will say, though, if you haven't seen this and we did, this is not a movie that is ruined by spoilers. It's not a very tension heavy movie by any means. So
well, and it's not plot. The plot is not what this film is about at all.
Yeah,
it's not about the plot, and so it would be a hard film to really spoil in that way. But yeah, I mean, any other thoughts from you on performances? I
love the moment that I'll say that one of my favorite moments of Sissy Spacek in this is when they walk out of the jeweler store and then Redford's trying to get her to steal this little bracelet that she has on, and then she kind of gives him a pap and they walk back in. I think that's a great little moment. But no, I think across the board it's really, it's kind of, again, the other thing about the 70s aesthetic of the film is that like even the performances are quite not hammed up in a like cheesy way, but they're it almost feels like they were specifically, especially for those extras, looking for like character actors in a way that could really land these, kind of funny Midwestern Southern bank tellers.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so that reminds me. And gosh, this is gonna be bad because I don't know his name right off the top of my head, but help me with this. I absolutely love this guy every time I see him in a film, and I'll explain his character here. So he was the kind of overset or heavier bank manager. We have the scene where he's describing Redford's character to the police who've come in right after the fact, and he's like, well, he was 50 or 60 years old, which, by the way, is hysterical.
Yes.
Redford is 80 in this film in real life, and I thought it was kind of literally to the point where I thought it was kind of an inside joke, where it was like I thought he was 50, maybe 60 when he's trying to describe the perp to the police, and I was like, oh my gosh, you've got to be kidding me. Nobody in their right mind. Now, as handsome as Redford is, there is no way in hell somebody is going to mistake him for being 50 or maybe 60 years old.
Yeah.
No. But who is this actor? Because I love this guy.
He's in the old No Country for Old Men. He's the
yes, he's the convenience clerk who does the coin flip, and his life is saved eventually by the coin flip.
And he's also apparently, I don't remember him in The Hateful Eight, but apparently he does have a role in The Hateful Eight as well. He's Sweet Dave, someone called Sweet Dave.
Oh, well, yes. Okay, I had forgotten about that. Sweet Dave, it was one of the owners of the haberdashery, if I'm not mistaken.
Right. So he's just in the flashback then in that
But
case,
he's just in it, right, because
Yeah.
he's, well, to spoil that film, but yes, something happens to him. And I'm going to feel really horrible that I can't think of his name, but maybe while I keep
It is
blabbing,
Gene
you can
Jones.
find it. Gene Jones.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Well, I thought he was great, and I think he typifies exactly what you were just talking about, which is there these really great character actors in these supporting roles that also kind of continue to lend that theme of, these great 70s characters kind of thing, 70s and early 80s characters.
Yeah.
There's one thing I want to talk, before we kind of move on to, because I want to talk about the soundtrack too and the score. But I want to bring up now because it was something that it was really a significant part of my viewing experience here. And I want to talk to you, kind of see what you're thinking is on it. So this kind of, especially 2 films in a row, this kind of trope, we see this all the time. Obviously, anti-heroes, we get them a lot. That's obviously very much kind of a thing that came into vogue in the 60s and 70s, right? I mean, in the 70s, it was like you couldn't have a regular hero. Like everybody had to be an anti-hero practically in American 70s
With
cinema.
all the new Hollywood stuff and
All the new Hollywoods, exactly. And we see, time after time after time, right? Criminals being turned into heroes, basically. And it's you watch this film and you can see, I mean, this is like part of what the film is talking about very explicitly. You've got this handsome, kind of gentle older man, and he's concerned about everybody's like, well, he's not, for the most part. Now there are parts in the film where he does put people into harm's way a bit, right? And he is like putting people at gunpoint. Now, we know he doesn't have any intention to hurt them, but I would imagine that in real life, if anybody put a gun to you, you'd be terrified. But, and the film goes way out of its way. It's like, if you notice, I mean, every single scene where he's robbing a bank, there's like a prominently displayed FDIC symbol in the background to kind of remind the audience, hey, he's not stealing from individual people. Don't worry. It's FDIC insured. Everything's okay, I just kind of noticed that after like the second or third bank heist, I noticed like, okay, it's not coincidence there's a big FDIC sign in the background of every single one of these,
bank robberies.
Bank robberies. And so,
I mean, if you can even call them that, because I feel like if you haven't seen this movie and you hear the word bank robbery, it's it's conversational. Like it's really just
But I guess it's like, it's just interesting, that we kind of, and yes, it's a film. And I tend to look at these films kind of metaphorically, right? Symbolically, not literally. But there is also a literal aspect of the film. Like there's literally, well, just what's going on there. So I think it's worth also discussing that aspect of it as well. But it's just kind of interesting. It's like this, especially with the tone here, it's so lighthearted, and it's so clear the film wants us to like this guy, right? And empathize with him, obviously. And so it's just, I don't know, what are your thoughts about that? About, somebody who's like this, he's addicted to stealing from people. He's like robbing people left and right. And he's done it. And he's done it his whole life.
We've almost had kind of this running theme for the past 3 movies, because we did Titanic before Drugstore Cowboy, and that obviously has not necessarily the theme of like crime, but the idea, Jack's whole thing in that
is
is
like a rapscallion. He's
it's like I'm not going to live a normal life. I'm going to go and I'm going to blah 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 blah. Wake up under a bridge and
right. And it's so poetic.
So I think that there's like I think people use the word romanticized in sort of a negative context a lot, but I think that it almost I almost see it as a positive in this, that it's this romanticization of. And I don't think, because of the fact that it's not that movies can't be violent, and not that movies can't feature bad people as their main characters, but the reason I say the romanticization of it isn't dangerous at all in this is because it's so. I can't imagine anybody watching this movie with the tone that it has and the way that it approaches this subject matter and take anything away from it other than like, man, this guy is just living his life, and it's almost like it's the inspiration to me, or the thing that it makes me think about is just do what you're good at, it's
so. Well, that's interesting. I would like I'll kind of play a devil's advocate in a sense, not on purpose, because this is like a genuine thought I had when I was watching it, and I just want to preface this by it. It can hold many different ideas about a film in your mind at the same time. So it's not like this is offensive or I was like triggered or something. But the one part of my experience, a part of it was that I myself having been a victim of fraud, of like significant fraud in the past. Once you have an experience, obviously this stands to reason with any kind of life experience. Once you've kind of had an experience that can alter your perception, it kind of gives you a little different angle, right? A different lens that you also look through the film in. So it's like, on the one hand, I see what the film wants me to see, which is to empathize with this guy and to kind of see this as a metaphor, and all these kind of things. But then on the other end, right, there's a little bit of something, my experience in real life is working against that. And I'm like, this guy's a butthead. This guy is like, his whole life, he's done nothing to contribute to society. He's just going around stealing stuff from people when he could be like, being a positive member of society.
Is it worth it for the great story?
And it's like I've been a victim.
Well, I think the interesting
thing
thing about that too is that you really empathize with Spacek's character, as at least I did, where it's like, it's kind of one of those situations where it's like you can't stay mad at the guy. Like you can, he's like a.
This is what I mean.
Yeah,
It's like, and I get it. I get all these things, So it's like I totally see that, and I understand that, and all those things. But then it's also colored with this other thing, and so there's part of me that's like, "Come on, Casey, get him, Casey, get him."
Yeah.
Like,
which is why I think it makes it also very interesting that that arc that Casey Affleck has. That's not to hit the nail on the head too many times, but that very much lines up with Pacino's arc in Heat, which is just this idea that like they need each other. There's this, and even I don't know, maybe you felt differently about the ending too when he walks in the bank.
I was just gonna say
you kind of cheer for him in a way. I was at least
okay.
Like,
okay. So it's interesting. I don't know that I did.
Right.
I don't know that I did. So that's interesting. Let's talk about that. So, at the very end, he's caught again. He's caught once again. He goes to jail. And then we have this like kind of cute little montage where he's sharing with his girlfriend all the times he's escaped. And basically what he's telling her is, I'll be out soon. So just hang tight.
Yeah, there's a 17 at the bottom and it's blank. And he's like, that'll be for this one.
She's like, hey, why don't you just sit tight?
Yeah.
Do your sentence.
Yeah.
Maybe you should stay put this time. And it's not bad advice. Now, slightly unrealistic, I think, if a guy had actually really committed this
At
many
16,
bank robberies,
yeah,
I
and
don't
escapes.
think he would have been out so soon. But hey, it's a film.
It seems like it's
a
like
film.
5 years almost that go by, but
if even, because I mean,
Yeah.
geez, he's already so old. I mean, he's not got that many years to go, you know.
yeah.
So he comes out the exact same way he looks wise. He comes out the same way he went in, and I don't even recall if they actually have any kind of title card or any kind of like recognition of how
There
much
is
time
a
passed.
date that
I
they
can't
give,
recall,
and I can't
yeah.
remember what it is. I've never really paid attention to the dates
Me either.
enough
But he comes out and they're together, and so we see that he didn't escape. Okay, so we think, okay, maybe he's changed his tune for to have this love in his life. Maybe he's and so they're together and it's idyllic, and they're on her, she owns horses and she's on this farm or ranch or whatever it is, and it's beautiful and wonderful, and we're like, oh, he's found this other thing in his life. He's actually found this love. And there was this part of me that when he says, hey, I've got to go out. She's asleep on the couch. He wakes her up a little and says, hey, honey, I'm going to go out. How long are you going to be gone? Not too long. And he leaves. And we have this really beautiful moment where she's like, she's asleep, right?
She's napping, and then
and after he leaves, she kind of opens her eyes, and we can see the gears turning in her mind. Like, uh-oh.
She's like, okay.
and then the last shot of the entire film is him walking into a bank with his briefcase that he always uses.
Before that, though, it's a great conversation between him and Casey, where he calls Casey Affleck,
thank you for
and
reminding me.
he's kind of like
He's
almost
saying
seems
game on.
almost like one of the darker moments of the movie, because you almost feel like Casey Affleck thinks that he's going to have suicidal thoughts or something like that.
Oh, I didn't think of that at all.
Because Affleck's kind of like, are you okay? And then he's like, yeah, I will be. Like, I'm about to be.
I completely, my interpretation of that entirely was that Redford is like, he wants the chase. He's like, it's game on.
Yes. Redford's side is definitely that. Yeah.
And I didn't get a sense that Affleck character, geez, we keep using the actors' names, and I feel so bad. I didn't even really gather the names of these characters, frankly, because it's just not a film that's really like that so much. I mean, it's like the title says, it's like the old man and the gun. It doesn't say like Steve and the gun. I mean, that's obviously not his character's name, but you get the point. I don't know. There was a part of me that was just like, oh, really?
That's funny. I almost took it as like
he's not giving up. Damn it!
Not
he's
even
not
that.
going
More so,
like,
just like, hey, makes him happy. Like you kind of see him. Like, and even when he's courting Sissy Spacek through the whole movie, he never stops talking. He's very charming. He's always got something to say. He's always making her laugh. And then you see after he gets out of prison, he just kind of meanders around quite silently and is aimless and doesn't know what he's doing. And this isn't an endorsement of robbery, but I do kind of like the that anti-hero ending. You can't help but sort of fall in love with a character that's so charming. And of course, it's fiction. It's not.
Of course, and metaphorically, it's like, hey, he may be down, but he's not out. He may be old, but he's got to keep going. And and I mean, and there are very explicit moments where he's like, it's not about the money. It's about like the life. It's about
he doesn't have like a nice car and a big house.
Well, and they show he's got a crawl space full of cash.
Yeah,
and they talk about how. He explicitly says it's not about money. It's about living. It's about being alive.
It's not. It's not about making a living. It's about I'm just talking about living. Yeah.
Yes, I'm not talking about making a living. I'm talking about living. And I think that really speaks. I think to the filmmaker. In my perception of it, or at least what I see in that is, and of course it translates to everybody and anybody. But you have Redford at the twilight of his life and career, and he's saying, look, it was never about the money, or even fame, or even any of these other things. It was about living.
Well, perhaps that's kind of what I guess I take away from it a lot too. Is just that like I've, especially recently, kind of lost a bit of a desire to be. I used to want to be as a kid like a studio filmmaker. I wanted to be and I still
Spielberg.
If someone like
you want to be like the kid wonder.
Yeah, if someone offered me money to do it. And it fell into my lap. Obviously, I wouldn't say no, but But I also, there's a side of me that's like, I kind of just wish that I could, travel the world for the rest of my life and make small little movies that maybe 1,000 people will watch, and that's it. And there's like a kind of a beauty to shaking off the confines of like societal structure and just kind of going that route. And I think that's kind of perhaps what maybe touches me at the end of the movie in that sort of way. That, and I think that I'm sure that it touches you in that sort of same way as well. But I think there's a you can't kind of help but
Cullen, don't go out and start robbing banks. Okay,
well, we'll see. We'll see. I gotta fund my next feature somehow. So,
I was just gonna say. I mean, like, look, you're gonna be on the record here in this podcast. I mean,
I will ensure this never comes out. This episode,
but of course, I mean, and that is, I think, it's an admirable thing. I think a lot of films touch on that in various ways. That and it is kind of this interesting. It's like, look, it's like we're all. It's kind of like the scorpion and the frog. I mean, we're all scorpions in the sense that it's like, well, you do what we do. You have to do what you do. That's what life is. How can you be what you're not? How can you do what you aren't? It's like, and so you put yourself into it and you do it with the absolute best you can. And at least in this, he's not hurting people. He does it with grace and he does it with kindness, so that you can at least say that. And like I said, there's only a couple instances where he kind of puts, for example, and it almost seemed a little out of character. He's desperate and he carjacks basically a car.
With a family or
with a woman
mom
and
and daughter, son
with a woman and her young son in it. Now, when he can see that there's this, because I don't think he recognizes there's a young child in the back, when he does recognize that, he actually does at least let them go. He still takes their car, and that really is going to suck for them. It's not exactly kind, but at least, he's not trying to like be maliciously, hurting people. So at least there's that. You got to give the guy props. At least he's robbing FDI insured funds and not trying to hurt people.
Just like Pacino said, or De Niro says, your money's insured by the guy. But I do also want to touch too on, just very briefly on, because there's not a ton to it, but the score.
Let's go back to
film,
that.
Is I think very lighthearted and matches the film. It's kind of like almost like a soft jazz score in a way, and like primarily pianos and a small string quartet. It almost seems like. And
I mean, it was scored by Daniel Hart, who is from Emporia, Kansas. Not that I'm not from Kansas, but it's from the heartland, from the Midwest. So I feel like it's close. It's a boy makes good from an area I'm not too far away from. So. Now, I'm not too familiar with his. I mean, I know that he worked on The Green Knight, which is still on my list of films to see, and of course, that's another film by the same director. And Peter Pan and Wendy, which is has that been released or is it soon to be released?
I think it's coming to. I don't know if it's going to be in
very
theaters
soon.
Or if it's a Disney Plus.
I'm not sure either. I know it's Disney Plus, and I'm not big on Disney live action. I think it's a live action Disney film. I'm not huge on those films. I don't keep up too much with it. Not that there's anything wrong with them, but I think its release date is like in a month or something like that. But so obviously they've been working. This is a duo that really enjoys working with each other. And I think it's a really good match, which is kind of what you were just discussing there. I think it's a good match to the style of this film, and the scores seem to really work well, in my opinion.
Yeah, and it's very charming. That song that plays under that mute cute that you mentioned earlier of Redford and Spacek in the diner is just very charming. It's kind of there's only really one like leitmotif in the whole score, and that's just kind of repeated throughout. And but it works because it's also a very montage heavy film. Like there's a lot of montage in the movie, and
that's true. Yeah,
and the score works really well for that. There's also a few soundtracks. I know Jackson C. Frank's "Blues Run the Game," which is I think a really great song, is playing when Redford's kind of giving up at the end on the horse.
Yeah.
Yeah, like so there's and that's kind of what I mean when I talk about like the melancholy, where it's almost also a positive melancholy though. It's this feeling that like even though you're
No, I would
melancholic,
say
it's not the end of the
bittersweet.
world.
You know what I would use? I instead of melancholy, I would actually maybe bittersweet is a slightly better word to use, because melancholy does have like a little bit of that like heavier undertone or kind of down, but this I feel like is more kind of bittersweet, where there's with the emphasis on sweet, you know. Maybe that's maybe more of a feeling that I get from a lot of, like, especially when you just described that scene and that song where he's on the horse and he's kind of being surrounded by all the police in their cars. We have this like beautiful like sunset. He's kind of silhouetted on his horse. It almost feels more kind of bittersweet.
Yeah, it's like he's like looking back on his career almost in a way, in that the time has passed and you can't relive it, but it still feels nice to have lived it in that sort of way. Like you can either, I think that's the thing. I mean, I'm not 80, but I feel like at that point you kind of have two choices, and that's either to be
smile
really sad about the fact that you can't do that stuff again, or to smile about the fact that it happened, right?
Well, it's an interesting, fun little thing. I think they really hit on a few times, which is that it's like when he's arrested, he was arrested with a smile on his face, or when he was, when he held up the bank and the cashier is kind of describing it, they were like, it's so weird. He was like happy.
Well, he was kind of polite.
He was like happy, It's like, does this picture represent what you saw? And they were like, well, kind of, except he was happier, So
he was smiling. Yeah,
it is kind of like this optimistic, It's like, hey, come what will, come what may. I get arrested, I'll find a way to break out. I'll do that. It's like, it's just kind of, it's almost like a Zen kind of exploration, where it's just like, hey, whatever life has to give me, I'm just going to keep on living. And whatever that thing is, if there's an opportunity, I'll accept it. If there's
too, is that if this is, and it seems like it very well might be, if this is actually Robert Redford's kind of last leading role in a film, I think it was a really great one for him to go out on.
You could do worse.
I think more people should watch it, because I think that this is a movie that I mention quite frequently that people haven't seen, let alone heard of. And not for any particular reason. I think it just kind of, again, flew under the radar. I know 2018 was if I remember correctly, it was a pretty big year for movies. So likely just, again, flew under a lot of people's radars. It didn't have a super long theatrical release. And it wasn't nominated for any awards. But again, I would heavily recommend it. It's not a big investment. It's an hour and a half. It's really easy watching. It's, pretty easy to throw on, and I would wholeheartedly recommend it if you're a fan of 70s film, if you're a fan of Redford, or if you just kind of want something to it's kind of like, it's a nice movie to watch in the afternoon if you think about it, like a nice rainy day and you're just stuck inside.
That's how I saw it. That's how I saw it, man. That's how we had some rain here again, and I agree. And hey, you don't even have to be into any of those other things if you just want to watch a nice film.
Exactly, yeah.
So I would agree. I'd recommend it too. It did fly under my radar, and I'm grateful that you brought it to my attention and that I was able to watch it and enjoy a conversation about it with you here today. And on that note, kids, it's that time to say goodbye. It's been wonderful.
We need a song.
Cullen.
We need an exit song that you sing every time.
I could try to do. Maybe I'll come up with one. Maybe I could steal something like "Now it's time to say
so
goodnight." I could like steal one of the Beatles.
Goodbye.
Okay. Oh my gosh, we're getting punchy, everybody. All right. Well, hey, we hope you enjoyed our conversation. Thank you for listening. We look forward to next time when I get to pick the next film.
We shall see.
Right. All right. Take care, everybody. Have a good couple weeks.
Bye-bye.
Boom.